Perhaps you could first briefly explain to us what deepfakes are and what different types of deepfakes we distinguish.
So deepfakes is a very broad category to describe the machine generation of text, audio, images, or video. And to be clear, there's nothing really new here in the sense of making up or manipulating images, audio, and video. It's that we have automated that process with machine learning and deep learning and artificial intelligence to make it easier and more powerful and more democratized. And that is probably the most important part here, is that we have always been able to manipulate images and videos and audio. Hollywood studios, state-sponsored actors. But now we are developing technology where you can navigate to a website, upload an image, and create a video of Vladimir Putin saying anything you want him to say. And that's why we think that this technology is particularly intriguing and also worrisome, because now almost anybody can create fake media with the power of artificial intelligence.
And how are deepfakes made?
So there's many different types of deepfakes. As I said, there's text, there's audio, there's image, and there's video. And there's different techniques for generating those. Let me just describe one of them very quickly. If you navigate to the website, thispersondoesnotexist.com, you will be presented with an image of a person who doesn't exist. It was completely synthesized by a machine. And the way this face was generated was that you pit two machines against each other. One is the generator and one is the discriminator. The generator's job is to make an image, splat down some pixels like a painter would. And the discriminator's job is to say, is it a face or not? And they work in a very tight loop. So the generator makes an image, hands it to the discriminator. It's not a face, try again. Not a face, try again. Not a face, try again. And loop, loop, loop. This is called a generative adversarial network. Generative because it makes something, adversarial because you've pitted these two systems against each other, and the neural net is the underlying computational machinery. And there you can see the power of deep fakes, because you don't have to do anything. You just pit these two machines against each other. You give it a little bit of data on what faces look like, or what satellite images looks like, or what landscapes look like, or cats or dogs, or whatever you want to generate. And the machine figures it all out. And while that's a very specific type of deepfake, all of the other techniques fall into a general category where you are using some type of neural network or some type of artificial intelligence or machine learning computation to synthesize or manipulate or alter media.
How are they currently being used or misused? I mean, nowadays you are hearing a lot about deepfakes, right?
Yeah, so lots of interesting applications that are not nefarious. People, for example, are making educational videos with synthetic people. That's sort of interesting, right? You don't have to hire actors, you don't have to get cameras, you don't have to get studios. You can create fairly high quality educational videos or marketing videos. People are lip syncing or dubbing movies, right? So if there's a movie in English and we want to see it in German, we don't want to see the mismatch between the mouth and the audio, we can create a deep fake where it really looks like that person is now speaking German, for example. Lots of interesting applications, lots of bad applications. The most prevalent one is probably a non-consensual porn, where people take images primarily of women, insert it into sexually explicit material, and then use that as a weapon against that individual. We are seeing it in fraud. People have been, millions of dollars have been stolen by creating deep fakes of audios and videos. We saw it recently in Berlin, where the mayor of Berlin was talking with somebody who they thought was the mayor of Kiev, but in fact it was not. We haven't seen it yet hit the disinformation campaigns, and that's very interesting, but that's probably just a matter of time before we start to see deep fakes playing a role in these larger disinformation campaigns.
How can we detect deepfakes? And maybe you can show us some of the technical measures to detect them.
There's two basic approaches. One approach, which is very hard, is you just sit back and wait for videos or images or audio to hit social media, to hit your inbox, and then you try to figure out what's real or not. And that is very hard. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. The other way, which I just want to mention before we get into that detection, is there's another way to think about this problem. Instead of trying to detect the fake things, let's authenticate the real things. So there is an effort called the C2PA, the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity, that says, look, most of us are walking around with these things right here in our hands. Yeah. And so when we make a recording from this, maybe what we should do is authenticate it on the device. So the actual device will authenticate it. It will tell me the date and time, where I am. It will prove provenance, who took it, and it will prove authenticity so that when that media finally makes it onto the internet, we know who took it and that it's authentic. I really like that technology because it works. Now, obviously that needs large deployment, and we can't rely on, for example, the Russians to use that type of technology. So what we have been focusing on is detecting deepfakes primarily of people like President Zelensky, President Biden, President Putin, for example, where the stakes are very high when you have a world leader speaking. And the way we do that, I'll just describe one technique, if I may, is when we speak, we have some mannerisms, right? So I, for example, speak with my hands. I tend to raise my eyebrows when I want to emphasize something. I tend to lean forward a little bit when I want to make a point. I furrow my brows sometimes when I talk. You're a little bit different. You smile more than I do, right? So we're all a little bit different. And what we do is for example, with President Zelensky, we can watch hours and hours of his videos where he's speaking at press conferences or giving interviews, and then we model the mannerisms, his facial expressions, his head movements, how he talks with his hands, and we build what we call a soft biometric model. It doesn't distinguish him from 8 billion people in the world, but it's probably going to distinguish him from an impersonator or a deep fake. And these models, very, very specific, one individual at a time. We focus on world leaders, CEOs, people when they speak have huge impact on the world, on the economy, on geopolitics. And that's just one technique that we are developing and have been developing to detect deepfakes. Last thing I'll say on this is that there's some tension here in the developing of these techniques, because when we develop techniques to detect deepfakes, they can also be used against us to create better deepfakes. And so we have to be very careful on how we develop these technologies and what we do with these technologies, because we don't want to get into this game where we develop a technology, it gets incorporated into the generative adversarial network and then creates a better fake. And so we have to think carefully about what are the techniques, how do we deploy them, who do we make them available to so that they don't get weaponized against us.
What do you think? What can we expect from these technologies in the future?
Yeah, look, there is no question that the deepfakes are here to stay. They are getting better and better. So OpenAI just announced the DALL-E image text to image synthesis. This is incredible technology. So now all you do is you go to their webpage and you type in, I want a photo of whoever doing whatever, and it will synthesize it from you from only the text prompt. Yeah. So it's just a matter of time before that's audio and that's video. And so the technology to manipulate and synthesize media is developing very, very rapidly. And the threats will follow it, as will the interesting applications. We are going to have to deal with the consequences of that with forensic analysis, with authentication like the C2PA, with education. People are going to have to learn how to get trusted information online, probably some regulation to force the Facebooks of the world and the Twitters of the world and the YouTubes of the world to take more responsibility for their platforms and how they're being weaponized. And hopefully we find some steady state here where we learn to live in a world where any image, any audio, any video, any text for that matter can be manipulated. My biggest fear is that if we don't get a handle on this from a technology perspective, a regulatory perspective, and an education perspective, is that we're going to enter this world where anybody can dismiss any inconvenient fact, the so-called liar's dividend. Because if we live in a world where anything can be manipulated, well, then you can deny reality. And then you have to ask yourself, how do we have society? How do we have democracies? How do we contend with global climate change? How do we contend with a global pandemic? How do we have elections when we can't agree on basic facts of what's happening in the world? And that is something we have to think very seriously about, because these are real existential threats to our society.
Looking at the media in the last few months, the number of real-time or live deepfakes is increasing. What do we have to prepare for to protect ourselves against those techniques?
Up until now, if you were a reasonably sophisticated person, you know that videos and images can be manipulated, and maybe you had some skepticism of the sensational videos you saw online. But for the most part, when we were in this configuration on a Zoom call live, you assume it's me, not my graduate student, because I was too lazy to get up at 9 o'clock in the morning, and it's not my graduate student impersonating me. That's a reasonable assumption, yeah. But the live deepfakes are getting even better now. And by live deepfake, I mean that it could be that there is somebody off to the side here looking at a camera, talking, and then it is animating an avatar of me. This technology exists. In fact, it's in Zoom right now. It's just the avatars are cartoons. I can actually show you, by the way, I don't know if you've seen this. Let me see if I can show you this, because I think it's actually, you can see that the technology is essentially there. Aha, good. So this is my Fox avatar, yeah? And I'm tilting my head to one side and to the other side, up, down. And you can see in real time, I'm blinking now, open my mouth wide, eyebrows up. You can see it is looking at me and animating a cartoon character, yeah? So it's not that far from this cartoon character to you or Putin or Biden or whomever. Okay. Let me go turn this off before it gets too weird. So that technology is already in Zoom, right? It's already there. And if we just replace that cartoon avatar with another person, that's it. We already have the technology on how to do this, because head tracking is very good. The animation of the model is very good. And so the technology is here. And now, President Zelensky recently testified before the US Congress over Zoom. How do we know it was him? How do we verify that, right? So one of the things that we are working is on verifying that type of live in demand at 30 frames a second. How do you verify that? And that's a really hard problem. But we have something working to our advantage, which is that the configuration is very specific, right? You are in front of a camera, typically arm's length away. And what you are in front of is a light source, right? So for example, what I'm going to do right now is open up a window that is bright. And what you probably just noticed is that my face got a little brighter. So let me turn it off, just got a little darker. So if I can control the illumination on the screen, I can impose lighting on your face, and then I can measure that in real time to determine if in fact I am sitting in front of the camera. And now you know I'm sitting in front of the camera because I just changed the illumination. And so we can control this thing, the screen, impose a pattern on the person talking, and then measure that in real time to determine if it's real or not. That's one of the techniques that we've developed.
Social networks and video platforms are under pressure by lawmakers and academics to remove disinformation. Do you see a change in the attitude of social networks and video platforms towards handling deepfakes?
Yes and no. I think that the platforms are saying that they're taking this seriously, but I don't think they are. And more broadly, I don't think they're taking the disinformation seriously. They're not taking the revenge porn seriously. They're not taking the fraud seriously. And more broadly, it's not really just about deep fakes. We have to think broadly. So whether it was a deep fake of the mayor of Kiev or not doesn't really matter, right? We are weaponizing technology. And for the most part, the social media companies, they've gotten a little bit better than 5 years ago, but I think it is still very cavalier about how their technology is being weaponized against individuals, against societies, and about democracies. And I think until there is real regulation, like the DMA and the DSA coming out of the EU, like the online harms bill coming out of the UK, and frankly, the US is completely absent in dealing with the companies that are physically here. But the good news is that I think the Australians, the Brits, and the EU are starting to force the companies to do a little bit better. But I think without that regulation, I don't think they're going to get better.
Okay, well, but so you see any tendencies in the US going on for having a tighter regulation for that?
The US Congress is a mess right now, and it's going to be a mess for the foreseeable future. I mean, we're arguing about who can use what bathrooms, honestly. I mean, it's embarrassing. And it's embarrassing because these companies are based here, and we are impacting 8 billion people in the world, and we have a responsibility to make sure those companies act responsibly, and we are not taking that responsibility. And I think that is a real dereliction of duty on the part of the Americans.
Are there any countries that are pioneers in doing a lot of social education?
Yeah, I think the EU has been one of the best. I think the Australians have also been very good, and the Brits as well. It's clearly you are leading. GDPR, DSA, DMA, these are the leading pieces of legislation. I think in the Western countries, we are, in varying degrees, okay. I think in developing parts of the world, it's a disaster. I mean, Myanmar, Ethiopia, Sri Lanka, the Philippines, so things are bad in the Western countries. They are very, very bad in developing countries where the education is not as good, the understanding is not as good, and people are getting the vast majority of their information from Facebook. And that is a terrifying state of affairs when the primary news source is Facebook and WhatsApp. That should terrify us. And that's why we are seeing horrific problems around the world.
And TikTok, right?
TikTok is the emerging.
And the news
exactly
that.
Right. That's right. And that's particularly complicated because of the China connection. So TikTok is very complicated as well. And for full disclosure, I should say I sit on TikTok's content advisory board for the US-based version of TikTok. Mm-hmm. I think that they are trying to do better than the other companies, but it is very difficult. They are growing very quickly. The good news is, I think with TikTok is that its roots are really in these entertainment videos. And I think that helps them in some ways, but you can't control what people do with your services, and people using it now for political purposes and for advocacy purposes. And that is going to be a real struggle for them as they get bigger and bigger and bigger, how to make sure that the platform is not being abused. It's a huge struggle.
And having a closer look on the ongoing war in Ukraine, do you see an increase in the activities of Russian or pro-Russian actors?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So first of all, there is no doubt that people are using TikTok to push propaganda on both sides. And I think that, the problem with propaganda is how do you define that exactly, right? And so for me, I think what we should be doing is saying TikTok is a place for entertainment, not news. Facebook is a place to connect with friends, not news. We have to distinguish our entertainment from our news. And we are not very good at that. I'm horrified that a significant number of young people say they get information, news from TikTok. No, that is not the place where you get news, right? It's a place to go and have some fun. And I think that's something we have not been good at separating, is that entertainment versus information and reliable news. And then we have to go back to understanding that journalists, editors, serious people doing serious work at the BBCs and the NPRs of the world are the places we go to get reliable information, not, the 14-year-old in TikTok.
And doing the way around to say that more journalists or more newspapers should be active in TikTok for like mixing a little bit, this thing is not the way to handle it, right?
Yeah, I don't think it is. I think you're muddying the waters when you do that, and I think it's essentially because then people can't tell the difference. Like, oh, it's an NPR TikTok versus Joe Blow TikTok. So I think I'm not saying you shouldn't do entertainment and you shouldn't do promotion on TikTok, but there's a place for news, and it's not in a 30-second video or 200 characters on Twitter or Facebook post. News is nuanced, and you need to have that sort of care and time, and mixing it up with the entertainment, I think, is dangerous. There's so many complications with TikTok, right? And the China connection is very complicated, a lot of tension, but also it is taking over the world. I mean, Facebook and YouTube and Twitter are in a lot of trouble because TikTok and Snapchat are now the preferred platform of young people. Mm-hmm. And so that's going to be really interesting to see what happens. And you can already see the copycats. Instagram is trying to copy, YouTube is trying to copy. Yeah. I don't think they're going to be successful. There's something really unique about TikTok. Now, how do they deal with the growth? How do they deal with the abuses? That's going to be it's going to be very interesting to see what they do.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Hany. Thank you for the conversation and for your interesting insights. Have a good time. Take care. Ciao.
It's great to see you. Talk to you soon. Cheers.
Ein Angebot der Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung.